Marvel never planned to make him a star. He was just a talking duck, a throwaway joke. But within months, Howard the Duck became one of Marvel's biggest cult hits. Fans couldn't get enough. Sales exploded. He even outsold major heroes. And then, the momentum just stopped. No one said why. No one explained what changed. But behind the scenes, something was happening. And it wasn't accidental. So how did Marvel go from accidentally creating a legend to quietly tearing it all down? This is the story of Howard the Duck. Howard the Duck first appeared in Adventure into Fear, issue 19 in December 1973, created by writer Steve Gerber and artist Val Myrick. He was introduced as a background character in a Man-Thing story, intended as a one-off joke. But the reader's reaction was immediate and unexpected. Letters poured in, especially from college students, who responded to Howard's satirical tone and unusual presence. Gerber built Howard as a cynical, wisecracking duck stuck in absurd situations. Marvel promoted him using the tagline, "Trapped in a world he never made." According to Gerber, the satire wasn't based on punchlines. The entire premise was the joke. That style resonated with an older, college-aged audience who weren't typical Marvel readers at the time. The demand for Howard's return grew rapidly. Students even confronted Stan Lee during his college lecture tours, asking when Howard would come back. In response, Marvel launched Howard the Duck issue 1 in January 1976. The comic had a large print run of around 275,000 copies and reportedly sold over 200,000, making it one of Marvel's best-selling titles that year. Marvel capitalized further by launching a parody campaign, Vote Howard the Duck for President, in 1976. Merchandise followed, including posters and satirical side comics. Frank Bruner's Scarface duck artwork became a recognizable image. By late 1976, Howard was among Marvel's most talked-about characters. While claims that he outsold Amazing Spider-Man may be exaggerated, his launch numbers were still exceptional. Howard had gone from a discarded panel to a national publishing success. But success brought scrutiny. Marvel's editorial leadership began paying closer attention to Howard's content, setting the stage for the internal conflicts that would begin the character's decline. At the center of that conflict was one man, Steve Gerber, the voice behind Howard's rise. And soon, the reason for his fall. Steve Gerber's voice defined Howard the Duck. His sharp, often controversial satire tackled politics, society, and even Marvel itself. But as Howard's popularity surged, Marvel became increasingly cautious about Gerber's irreverent approach. From the beginning, Marvel struggled to manage Gerber's unconventional style. Original artist Frank Brunner left after just 2 issues, frustrated over disputes regarding creative credit and Marvel's editorial decisions. As Marvel expanded Howard's presence into mainstream media, launching a syndicated newspaper strip in 1977, the creative tensions escalated further. Initially scripted by Gerber, the strip quickly encountered difficulties. Marvel's editorial management, particularly editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, grew frustrated by Gerber's repeated lateness. Shooter later publicly blamed Gerber for falling 2 months behind on strip deadlines. Marvel also grew uneasy with Gerber's increasingly bold satire, such as the creation of Dr. Bong, a direct parody of Marvel's iconic villain, Dr. Doom. Internal frustrations peaked in early 1978. On May 2nd, Stan Lee officially terminated Gerber's contract, citing chronic lateness. Gerber viewed this firing as a direct attack on his creative independence and responded with legal action. On August 29, 1980, Gerber sued Marvel's parent company, Cadence, claiming ownership rights to Howard, a groundbreaking lawsuit in the comics industry. The lawsuit was significant for its timing and implications. It was one of the earliest major creator rights cases in comics history. Gerber fought for nearly 2 years, investing roughly $140,000 into the battle. However, the case never reached trial. In September 1982, Gerber and Marvel settled quietly out of court. Marvel retained complete ownership of Howard the Duck, while Gerber secured a financial settlement and formal acknowledgement as the character's creator. Gerber's dismissal and subsequent lawsuit marked a turning point. His unique voice, the element fans identified as essential to Howard, was silenced. Marvel now had full control, but without Gerber, Howard's authenticity and satirical edge vanished rapidly. But Marvel wasn't done yet. They tried keeping Howard alive. New writers, new issues, and even a new direction. But nothing worked. In fact, things were about to get worse. Following Steve Gerber's departure and the legal settlement in 1982, Marvel continued publishing Howard the Duck with other writers, most notably Bill Mantlo. Marvel hoped the character's popularity would carry on despite the creative change. However, readers quickly sensed the shift. Under new creative direction, the satirical, provocative edge that had defined Howard was significantly diluted. Artist Steve Bissette later stated explicitly that non-Gerber Howard stories were downright horrible and made no sense. Many readers echoed this sentiment, recognizing immediately that Howard's distinctive voice was missing. The series saw various attempts at revival. Marvel briefly published a movie adaptation comic and sporadic color issues, but these stories failed to connect with fans. The biting satire and commentary that made Howard resonate with an adult, intellectual audience were replaced by simpler humor and cartoonish scenarios. Sales reflected this decline. The drop in readership was noticeable, and the enthusiasm that had propelled Howard's earlier success vanished. Marvel's management increasingly struggled to justify continued investment in a character whose original appeal seemed irrecoverable. As the 1980s progressed, Howard gradually faded from prominence. Marvel reduced his appearances, and new stories featuring Howard became rare. The vibrant satirical figure that had sparked widespread fandom and mainstream media attention was reduced to a mere background character, often serving as comic relief rather than meaningful social commentary. Without Gerber's authentic voice guiding him, Howard became indistinguishable from typical cartoon characters, a shadow of the cultural icon he had once been. Marvel retained ownership, but the character's soul, the distinctive humor and rebellious spirit, had largely disappeared. But instead of rebuilding him on the page, Marvel took a gamble, one that would take Howard from cult hero to cinematic catastrophe. In 1986, Universal Pictures and Lucasfilm released a live-action Howard the Duck film. Directed by Willard Huyck and executive produced by George Lucas, it marked one of Marvel's earliest big-screen adaptations. The budget was sizable, estimated between $37 and $46 million, and the film featured a recognizable cast including Lea Thompson, Jeffrey Jones, and Tim Robbins. Howard himself was portrayed by a costumed actor and voiced by Chip Zien. From the start, the adaptation deviated sharply from Gerber's original tone. The film abandoned Howard's political and social satire in favor of slapstick humor, awkward romance, and bizarre special effects. The original complexity of the character was replaced with cartoonish absurdity, which confused longtime fans and alienated general audiences. The response was overwhelmingly negative. Critics called it a disaster. The Los Angeles Times described it as a numbing waste, while Siskel and Ebert mocked it on national television. The film won 4 Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture of 1986. Box office numbers confirmed the failure. After a modest $8 million opening, it collapsed quickly and ended its domestic run with just $16.3 million, less than half of its production cost. The fallout extended beyond box office losses. Universal studio chief Frank Price resigned shortly after the film's release. Director Willard Huyck never directed another major studio film. Within Marvel, the reaction was equally grim. Editor-in-chief Jim Shooter later recalled that Stan Lee referred to the film's comic adaptation as the worst thing I've ever seen. While Steve Gerber had some initial involvement as a consultant, he later expressed disappointment with the result. By 2001, he criticized the movie for turning Howard into little more than a visual gag, stripping away the character's satirical core. The film had lasting consequences. Howard's image shifted from cult icon to national punchline. For years after the film's release, Marvel distanced itself from the character. Howard appeared only in minor cameos and was largely removed from serious publishing plans. The 1986 movie didn't just fail financially. It erased over a decade of creative momentum and made it nearly impossible to present Howard the Duck as a meaningful character again. The damage was done, but Marvel still wasn't ready to bury him completely. After the failure of the 1986 film, Howard the Duck's presence in Marvel Comics sharply declined. Through the late 1980s and 1990s, the character was used sparingly, appearing in occasional cameos and background roles, often treated more as a joke than a serious figure. Marvel did not pursue any major revival during this period. Steve Gerber returned to the character in 2002 with a 6-issue miniseries under Marvel's Max imprint. This series, aimed at mature readers, was Gerber's final significant project involving Howard. Though the mini received attention from longtime fans, it didn't lead to a larger publishing relaunch. Gerber retained his creator credit following the 1982 settlement, but had no ongoing role in Marvel's future use of the character. Marvel continued to test Howard's viability with smaller projects. In 2007, a 4-issue Media Duckling series by Ty Templeton briefly brought Howard back into print. In 2015, writer Chip Zdarsky and artist Joe Quinones launched a new Howard the Duck series, which ran for a limited time. These modern iterations updated Howard for a new generation, but were short-lived and didn't restore him to his former status. In film, Howard appeared in brief cameos in Guardians of the Galaxy, 2014, What If, and She-Hulk. These appearances were acknowledged by fans, and Marvel credited Gerber and Mayrick in the film's credits. However, none of these led to a full cinematic revival or a major role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Despite this, Howard's influence remains visible. Characters like Deadpool and She-Hulk, especially in John Byrne's 1980s run, carry the same DNA, meta humor, fourth wall breaks, and satire targeting the comic industry itself. Even Spider-Ham, introduced in the early 1980s, reflects Howard's legacy as a parody-based character. While Howard never regained the position he held in the 1970s, the elements that made him popular, irreverence, subversion, and commentary, continue to shape modern Marvel characters. His impact remains, even if his spotlight has faded. So, the question remains, if Marvel had protected Steve Gerber's vision instead of replacing it, would Howard the Duck be one of Marvel's leading icons today? Or was he always meant to be a reminder of what happens when corporate control wins over creative courage? Also, press the subscribe and like button with the bell icon for regular updates.